Step 1 is to boil the bones. We're going to place all of the bones at the bottom of the large stock pot. And in this case, I'm using about 4 pounds. You can use more, but I think 4 pounds will do it just fine. We're going to put the rest in the freezer and fill up the pot with water up to about 1 inch above the bones. So as you put your large stock pot on the hot stove, you might hear some crackling and popping. So you want to clean off the bottom of the stock pot just to help prevent some of that. This is optional, but here I'm adding some salt to the pot just to help the water boil a little bit faster and to clean the bones. I don't know if that's truly what it does, but at this point it doesn't hurt to add any salt. So you can, but you don't have to. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes. We're gonna pour off the water and clean the bones. So after all the water is gone, we're gonna turn on the tap water and just kind of rinse off the bones a little bit. Now as you look at the bones, you'll notice some dark stuff coming out of it, and that's totally fine. It's just blood. People do eat blood. It is a delicacy in some cultures, so it's definitely not harmful to eat this stuff. But we just clean it out to make the soup look a bit more aesthetically pleasing. Gives it a cleaner look, a cleaner taste. So we're just gonna clean that off. Again, we're gonna clean off the bottom of the stock pot so that it can have some good contact with the stove and transfer heat better. So what I'm gonna do next is something that not everyone agrees with. I'm gonna cover the pot with a lid, and some people have told me that makes the soup darker or more cloudy. That hasn't been my experience. I like doing this because it enables me to use a lower heat setting, which saves energy. You can achieve the same gentle boil with this method. To me, if you can save some energy, why wouldn't you? So we just finished the second boil on the bones here, and we're just rinsing it off real quick before we put it on the stove to begin the long cooking process. After setting the clean bones aside, I'm gonna wash the stock pot. I think this might help to keep the soup clean. I don't know that it's totally necessary, so if you're too lazy to do it, I think that's totally fine. After cleaning the pot, just fill it up with water, put your bones back in. You're gonna leave about 2 inches from the top. Put it back on the stove and boil it for at least 6 to 8 hours. As your soup is developing, go ahead and prepare your other ingredients. Here I'm preparing the beef tendons, which is optional. Basically, I'm gonna boil it for several hours in a smaller stock pot. This one is actually 5 quarts. I had originally planned for 3 hours, but actually ended up boiling it for 6. Again, I'm putting a lid on the pots so that I can use a lower heat setting and save some electricity. My son was feeling sick, so I had to leave the house to pick him up from school. On the way home, we stopped by the grocery store to pick up some protein, one for his lunch and the other for the pho. Here you can see me preparing his steak for him. And you'll have to pardon my tripod being in the way on the left-hand side. I'm kinda new at this, so. The sliced beef doesn't have to be anything fancy. Here I actually have a bottom round roast, and it costed about $5 a pound. You really only need about 1 pound of meat. Here I'm trimming the fat off of the bottom of the meat. I have about 2 pounds total in this video. I'm only using about 1 pound when I actually slice it. The rest of it I'm going to save for a different use. Place the meat in the freezer after you trim off any unwanted fat. At least every 2 hours you want to check the water level of your pots and replenish them as necessary. So I forgot to grab footage of this the first time around, but that's a bowl of fat that I just took out of the freezer. The fat comes from the very top of your soup, the one that's boiling in the large stock pot. So every hour or two, you want to scoop out as much fat as you can. I like to put it into a little bowl and then stick it in the freezer for a little bit, maybe about 15 minutes. And then what that does is the fat will harden to where you can scoop it out of that bowl and put it into a different container to save for later if you want, or you can just throw it away. What's left at the bottom of the bowl is just soup that you can dump back into your pot. Fats and oils tend to float on top of water, so that makes it pretty easy to scoop that out of your pot. Now you're gonna get some of the soup too, and that's fine. Just do the best you can, and again, just use the technique that I use. Freeze your bowl for 10-15 minutes and scrape out the fat, dump the soup back in. At the restaurant, whenever you order pho, you might notice that your bowl does not have very much fat in it. I've learned from a friend that you can actually ask for this from the restaurant. It's called nước béo. Nước means liquid in Vietnamese, and then béo means fat. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why would anyone ever want to do that? Put fat back into your pho. Well, fat has a lot of flavor and richness, so by adding it back in, you're enhancing the flavor, if that's your thing. Otherwise, you don't have to. You want to grill your onion and your ginger to bring out more of its flavor. So go ahead and preheat your grill like I am now. Give it a good cleaning if it needs it, and just let it get hot. The ginger you can peel by using a metal spoon and just kind of gently scraping off the skin. You can also achieve this with a knife, but this is just another strategy that I learned. With the onion, go ahead and peel off the papery first layer, and maybe even the second layer if you want to. Now, even though I am grilling these items, it's not something that you have to do. You can apply heat in other ways as well. If you have a stovetop that has exposed coils as heating elements, you could turn that on and stick your ginger and your onion right on top of that. Alternatively, if you have an oven, which most people do, I think, you can just broil it for a little bit. I haven't ever kept track of how long I've cooked these for, but I usually just cook them until I can smell a pleasant onion and ginger scent. I would say it shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. Okay. The tendons in this video had been cooking for almost 6 hours and they got pretty soft. Some people like it that soft, including myself. Others like a little bit more bite to it. By scooping the fat out and putting it into a bowl and then freezing it for a short amount of time, the fat will become solid to where you can scoop it out, but the soup will stay liquid so you can pour it back into your pot. This will be my third and my last time that I'm scooping fat off the top of my soup. Again, you want to do this every 1 to 2 hours during the first half of the cooking process. As you can see, my soup is pretty nice and clean. And now I'm going to put in the onions and the ginger. The heat for the tendons has been turned off at this point, and they have been cooling. I'm going to be taking them out now, and the water that I used to boil the tendons I'm going to keep and use later. I'll actually be adding it to the soup, which is totally optional. I'm going to be doing some more prep work, but before that I'm going to wash the vegetables. For most, you can basically soak it in a large bowl of water and then leave them out to dry. The drying process does take some time, so that's why I'm going to wash the vegetables first and do some other prep work while it's drying. Onions will be used as one of the toppings, and you want to slice these very thin. I have two different knives that I use, a 7-inch Santoku knife and I think it was an 8-inch chef's knife. I feel like a chef's knife works better for this. So for the onion, chop off the two ends and then cut it in half so that you have a flat surface for the onion that you're working with. It's much safer. And then just start slicing it as thinly as you can. Grab the green onions, or spring onions as some people call it, and then chop off the roots, and then chop off the white part, taking in some of the green. We're going to use that here in a little bit as a garnish. The rest of the green onions you want to chop into smaller segments about 1/4 centimeter. For the end pieces, you're going to turn them into squids with 8 legs or 10 legs. So split them about halfway down the length of the green onion. Rotate it a little bit each time as you do it. For cilantro, I normally chop off the end of it and throw it out, and then coarsely chop them into roughly 1-inch segments. With a clean cutting board, I'm gonna chop up the lime, and I usually split it in half and then into quarters, and then those quarters into 3 pieces. Remove your meat from the freezer and notice the direction of the grain, and make sure you try to cut against the grain. It doesn't have to be exactly 90 degrees, but somewhere close to that. Actually, if it's less than 90 degrees, that might be better, because then the meat might stay together a little bit better. At least I think so. And then just try to cut as thinly as you can. If you keep your meat in the freezer for an hour or so, the meat becomes much more firm, and it makes it a lot easier to cut it more thinly. The tendons you want to cut somewhat thinly as well, maybe like a 1/2 centimeter thick. Cook the meatballs in the smaller stock pot for about 10 to 15 minutes. About 30 minutes to an hour before you want to serve your first bowl, you want to add in your spices. Into your spice bowl, you're going to add about a tablespoon of coriander seeds, about 5 stars of anise, 4 seeds of cardamom, or amomum I think is another name for it, about a teaspoon of cloves, and 1 cinnamon stick. These are very rough approximations. I don't typically measure how much of these ingredients I add, but I think that's probably a good ballpark. There may be some other spices that people add that I don't add, such as fennel. You can add that if you want, it's up to you. Go ahead and take out the meatballs to allow them to cool. Larger spices like cinnamon and star anise can be added directly to the pot if they don't fit inside your spice ball. Add in about an 1/8 cup of salt. The spice ball is added towards the end of the cooking process because if you remember, during the first half, you're constantly scooping out fat. Flavors from spices tend to be fat soluble, so you don't want to be throwing that away. Taste your soup and add more salt if needed. I normally cut the meatballs into at least 3 smaller pieces. You can organize similar toppings into the same container. So cooked meats such as meatballs and tendons can go in the same. Raw meat goes by itself. Vegetables can all go together. Remember the water that we used to boil the tendons and the meatballs in? Well, feel free to add some or all of that into your pho pot because it'll add some more flavor. As water evaporates during the cooking process, don't forget to replenish that water. For the noodles, go ahead and get some water boiling. You can either use a knife or a pair of scissors to cut portions of noodles for each bowl. For fresh noodles, add enough so that the bowl looks full. This will be enough for the average person. Each package will serve about 3 to 4 people. When you cook the noodles, they will tend to shrink and it's going to look like you don't have enough. But trust me, it's plenty. If you really want seconds, you can go back and get seconds, but please don't start with too much noodles. Once your noodles are ready, go back to the beginning of the video and add in whatever toppings you like. After you have your toppings in, pour in your soup. The soup will cook the meat. Enjoy!